A career that hasn't evaporated is some kind of coach. I've been a software engineer for 15 years. That's another career that hasn't evaporated. Every industry related to information work is going to be impacted by AI. I would recommend finding a measurable quality of your production. Could be the number of things you produce. Find a measurable quality of production that you can increment and learn how you can work with AI to increment that dimension faster or more effectively, more efficiently. Your coworkers are going to want to relate to a human pace. And if you have a relationship with AI, then you can reflect on which dimensions of shared experience we can be more lenient on. So when you notice a language model make a mistake and you share the opportunity to do information work with someone else, reflect on the meaning of the various degrees of quality you can control and the language that you have to describe the input and output of your intent. In conversation with human systems, the ways we relate to taste are significant. Cheers. Timing videos is important, but not for the reasons you might think. For one, the algorithm is actually multiple algorithms. There are the human behavioral algorithms, which are the things that we do. Then there are the ranking algorithms, which determine which content we see. Then there are algorithms related to compression and filters, and so on. You, as a creator, have finite energy. When people in your community recognize you, they're more likely to engage in positive and uplifting ways. If you make TikToks at a time when people are waking up and they check their phone and you are someone they see on one of the days in one of the weeks in a month, then you might be more recognizable than one of the thousands or millions of other people they might see. And if you make 2 or 3 TikToks per hour for a few hours per day for a couple of years, then you'll have minutes. Eventually, you'll have dozens of minutes that someone can watch per day. If you start small, it gets easier to make longer videos, and then you can just make videos that are dozens of minutes long. So, if your aim is to get into long form content, I would recommend practicing making TikToks and then stitching them together at the end of the day and then having your year in review. Pardon. TikTok has an on this day feature which recycles, it revisits, it displays TikToks that you've made a year ago on that day. Then you can go through and select which ones you want to revisit and then reintegrate that into a new video. I'd like to clear up some misconceptions about how I actually make money from TikTok. And I'd also like to clarify the difference between making money at all and making money to sustain any dimension of intent. And the reason that I'm doing this, the reason that I'm describing how I make money through TikTok, is because other creators start creating with an idea of having a career in a conventional form. And there are a variety of conventions you can follow through social media in terms of having a career, but the reasons every person makes a video or a post is going to be different from person to person per platform. It might be cynical, or you might recognize the cynicism in saying every person is making a video for money, because that isn't true, for one. Some people are just making videos because they like it. Other people make videos because TikTok has captioning features, and that's the reason that I started making TikToks. Others use it for communication or just to see what they can develop to practice skills. I appreciate being able to reflect on the reasons why I make videos and how much I actually have to say about a topic, and when it seems like I've communicated an idea clearly enough. And I also do appreciate reflecting on the challenges that TikTok has just sporadically throughout their interface. I feel like they're optional enough and well balanced enough that I don't mind encountering them. And these are literal challenges, like the gamification built into the platform. There are layers to it, there are multiple different dimensions that I can consider. And I can also reflect on my career throughout my lifetime and think about which dimensions of TikTok apply elsewhere. Professionally, I've been a software engineer. I've also done a fair bit of work in production. When I reflect on the roles that I've had as a software engineer, and I have described them through multiple videos, multiple times, I've had multiple stints of intent towards describing my career, multiple stretches. I'm curious which language I'm going to want to use to describe the ways that I've related to describing my career on TikTok. Because now I have practiced making videos like this, and when someone is hiring an engineer, they might expect engineers to be practiced making TikToks. Though specifically, the way that I communicate through TikTok is how I've practiced communicating after about 13 years of a development career. And this is challenging to actually put a date on. When I started coding, I want to say was around 2010, 2011, probably late 2010-ish, or something like that. It might have been earlier if you count Scratch. And there are a variety of cognitive skills that were practiced just in the coursework that I was going through. And I've been drawing my whole life, since I could hold a pencil. Probably since I could hold a crayon is a better way to say that. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science, although I went to college planning to be an electrical engineer. I got accepted into the Division of General Studies as an undeclared major and took coursework in the electrical and computer engineering curriculum for about 2 years. I participated in research in the Photonic Systems Lab and the Adult Learning Lab. I've described this thousands of times, this being the reason that I have the skills that I do. When someone's considering why they would hire anyone, and I present them with the option of hiring me, then I intend for the reasons they would hire me to be because they want to hire me. And I do practice my skills, and I intend to describe how I practice my skills. One of the skills that I've practiced is making videos, and now we have AI that can summarize videos. The reason someone might hire me is 15 years of experience writing software and 15 years of reflecting on what that means, contextualizing my development in the context of learning and education studies, and considering how I can build a composable ecosystem like what I learned in electrical and computer engineering courses. Attending a research-oriented university helped me learn how to practice, helped me learn how I could practice for the kind of career that I wanted to have, for the kind of career that I'm building. And I appreciate TikTok for providing a medium that allows me to iteratively consider the dimensions that I am practicing and share the experience with others. Not everyone makes videos and not everyone goes live, and some people do each with a frequency that others aren't interested in matching. I also appreciate that TikTok has an on this day feature that allows me to consider which videos I want to bring forward. I do believe there are some videos that I'm probably not going to want to consider again, and I wish there were a way for me to set those aside and archive them. But it is nice for me to be able to see 25 minutes. The video that I made yesterday, I think, was 22 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes, I want to say. Generally, when there's an on this day come up with TikTok, then that's the length of the video stitched together. That does depend on whether I include images, and I noticed that TikTok's features influence the way that I'm considering designing my stylistic practice. So as I communicate the creative direction for the film that I'm producing for 2027, or the media that I'm producing for the next several years, as I'm communicating creative direction and considering art style, I'm going to be considering the technology that I've been practicing and the ways that I've been practicing consistency. Then I can recommend that people do what they've seen my consistency reward. Well, I'm not sure if that's misleading, so I can give people nuanced guidelines. Well, software engineering isn't easy. The language that we have to communicate ideas, we do, and when we need software, the reason that we need software is because the density of the logic that we intend to navigate is more than we can communicate with the natural language we've developed in common. With the natural language we've developed in common. Now there are new densities that we can communicate with new nuance, but the nuance matters. It is perhaps stylistically relevant. Maybe this is where language models and fashion intersect. Cheers. There are some surefire ways to grow your account on TikTok, but realistically, we can't have that many deep connections that quickly. Like, there's a limit to the number of deep relationships we can form in any amount of time. Reaching 1,000 followers at all is a good time to reflect on how many of your mutuals you actually can have a conversation with. If you can get to a point where there are 100 people who you can say something unique to and reflect on and consider as an actual human, then you can start to reflect on a world based on the percentage of people who share something in common with any individual. Then, as time goes on and you see each other's TikToks and you go live with each other, then you can reflect on how you can build a world together. I've been doing this for 3 years. Hire me as a web developer and as a learning coach. The web is more than just websites. It's also what we share. Cheers. If you're a solopreneur and your business depends on custom-made software that was designed before 2024 or 2025, then I would consider seeing where you can get with Claude. Claude Code is useful for designing or developing applications, and also designing applications to a certain extent. You can also see where you get with GPT Codex. I'm not sure if that's what it's called. The point is that at the very least, whatever you describe about your business, since it's developed in the past couple of years, whatever you describe about your business today is going to be what's relevant in a software context. You might be able to reduce the complexity of your software just by describing what your users care about today. Also, these coding models are pretty capable, and it's worth considering the pace of development and the structures that we're actually entertaining. I recently spent $90 with Claude in $5 increments implementing software that I've written before. When developers talk about the potential extensibility of software, it can be very abstract and not necessarily useful. I've been having actual conversations with other artists, other creators, other engineers about where I want this software to go. So the reasons why I'm extending it were more targeted. So I can measure the extensibility or gauge the extensibility of the software with respect to a development target set by actual use. This means that even if I don't continue with Claude, I've spent about $100 aligning the development of my software with what I actually care about. Throughout 2025, I read through deep research reports generated by ChatGPT and Gemini, like I actually read them out loud, live on TikTok. And I received feedback from the audience about what was interesting and communicated this with my community. And every Wednesday, I at least point to the concept of RPG Wednesday. I pretty much just asked Claude to align the software that I've been considering with the direction that is reasonable based on what I've been doing. I would recommend learning about version control. Git is pretty popular. Cheers. When I first started making videos, I didn't intend for this to be the thing that I did full time, and a lot has changed about the world. I noticed a misalignment between what industry expected and what academia was preparing students for. Additionally, I noticed some developmental stagnation from an industry perspective towards the kinds of problems that we were actually solving. Individuals tend to get however far they do, and there's a certain point where we need to come together in some capacity to get further than wherever we can on our own. Communicating whatever we do requires an amount of energy, and that can be distributed amongst a team, and we can focus more on developing. Though being productive with a process and making a process more efficient or evaluating which processes you want to change are different. Reflecting on process is useful if your goal is improvement. Finding a group you can maintain consistency with is very helpful. This might take a few tries, and different platforms make different structures more or less accessible. Sometimes navigating overwhelming experiences can be helpful for growth, and you can abstract your experience to another. How do I say that? Sometimes we have overwhelming social experiences and then re-enter environments with skills that we've developed since. I'm reflecting on a couple overwhelming group chats I was in on X that made it easier for me to find a tune that I didn't mind with other group chats. Not every group is going to align with every kind of energy, and some groups are going to be more overwhelming than they seem rewarding. I've also noticed rapport is still relevant in digital spaces, and I've also learned a lot about disability justice since I've been primarily online. The videos that I've been making today have been a reflection on having about a half hour of video content per day that recycles per year. I've learned a lot through making these videos, and probably what has been the most significant has been starting with a process for making videos that took an amount of time and becoming more efficient at that process. Then, using the time that I would have otherwise spent editing, doing anything else. Sometimes when I'm working through a concept for a video, I procrastinate by working on something else that I want to progress, and in the process of seeing the other task progress, mentally I advance in the process of planning the video that I'm planning. An important dimension of the videos that I've been making, and probably will make for the foreseeable future, has been improvising alongside prepared materials. When I reflect on computer architecture and the kinds of programs that I want other people to be able to extend, I'm considering the amount of information that I can actively process and quickly integrate into a present moment. Then I consider what I studied in college, which was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science. I reflect on the research that I participated in the Photonic Systems Lab and the Adult Learning Lab, and I walk through what stands out about my software development career. Different things feel relevant at different times, and the act of recalling my experiences is what makes them stand out. When I go live, I often reflect on the experience of making videos and my experience as a creator, and when other people who make videos come onto my live as a guest, I share the experiences that we have in common with them. When I'm live on TikTok, I'm not entirely sure who's watching, so I reflect on what it's like to see someone enter and be surprised by that experience. And I appreciate the social context that makes this something that I can learn from. I can also describe how I learn and recommend doing something similar, and I feel comfortable doing that because of this platform. When I make videos like this, I practice enunciating and reflecting on what I actually have to say. It requires an amount of attention to make it through an actual video as a person who makes the videos, and I also know that it's going to take some amount of time to edit this video. The first videos that I made for YouTube were about the video making process. I might have made a couple videos before that, but the first video that I remember making was a recursive or a reflective, I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to think about what the actual term is, but I was reflecting on the process of how I make videos and making a video about that process as the first video. Then I iterated on that process. So iterative, I guess, would be the word. Iterative and reflective rather than recursive. Although some of those videos were about, or they did involve me screen recording myself watching a video that I had made about making videos, which might be meta-reflection. Anyway, I practice remaining on subject per video and considering what I have to say in the moment and improvising a coherent flow of dialogue. I've lost my job before, and the reasons, well, not necessarily the reasons. Feedback that I received from managers were that I communicated too abstractly, the projects that I was working on or interested in didn't align with what the company was interested in, and I didn't communicate like a senior software engineer. Now I know I can communicate with an audience, and some of this audience includes software engineers. The set of people I can communicate with includes software engineers and people who hire software engineers, because I have been hired by people who I have communicated with. Also, I've said a lot of the things like I've described in video, a lot of the perspectives that have made it possible for me to develop as a software engineer in a context where automation exists. So now one of the questions is, will people do the bare minimum to actually develop whatever they would want to or need to in order to have businesses in the future or maintain something that can appreciate and value? For example, when I describe that I maintain relationships with artists, do you actually buy art from the artists that I mention? Or do you buy art at all? And do you buy art in contexts where your art can appreciate and value? If you're building software, are you developing software that you hope is going to reach some level of quality before you actually sell it? And is the amount that you spend on that software before you know that you can sell it worth the expense? So the call to action or the call to consideration is, are you doing the day-to-day things, considering automation, that actually increment your ability to make the best use of where we are with AI? I recognize that if my brand is leaning towards learning is part of my brand. My brand, what does that mean? What does it mean for me to have a brand? I know that there's an audience who is watching this video because I'm making this video and it is released at a time when the kinds of videos that I make like this might be more meaningful. And I've also I've also described things that can be done that can be returned to by the person who's considering learning with me. So in a year, can you return to a video that describes what you've been working on a year ago? And can you rely on TikTok to provide or surface something from a year ago that is relevant to what you're doing today? It doesn't need to be TikTok specifically, although TikTok has all of the features that I intended to describe in this video. Being able to reflect on what you have to say and consider how that relates to what you've been saying and how that relates to the ways your message has been received in a variety of forms, your general platform message and your individual messages. If you make videos, then you can practice developing a voice, and that voice can be more uniquely yours and represent a dimension of your brand that can be more relatable to an audience that you're going to be more energized by. You might be very good at what you do, but if it exhausts you to communicate with your audience, then you aren't going to want to be good at what you do. So if you can find a rhythm that you can maintain, then that is valuable for a variety of reasons beyond just whatever you have to say. Also, if our capital can talk now because of artificial intelligence and we're practicing socialism in the US, then it might be good to practice the social dimensions of technology, techno social something. Hire me as a learning coach, or hire me to describe modern technology as you write your book, or hire me to format your book, or hire me to get you hired into software engineering, or hire me for web development, like hire me for a website. You can also hire me for digital design, like logo design or motion design. Hire me to help you learn AI. Cheers.